Hello and welcome to the first of several videos to teach you about the wonderful world of Latin. Today's video will introduce you to first and second conjugation verbs. Now, I realize a lot of the words in that sentence probably don't make as much sense to you as you'd like, so let's start by talking about one of the words that does make more sense to us: verbs. So Merriam-Webster.com defines a verb as a word that characteristically is the grammatical center of a predicate. So the verb is the center, the major feature of the predicate, what the sentence tells us that the subject is doing. And a verb expresses an act, occurrence, or mode of being. So to start from the back part, the mode of being, it could be a linking verb or a verb of existence, like he is, she exists, it was, any of those. It could tell us about an occurrence. It happened. Or it could tell us about an act. He ate, she slept, it ran. The other 2 points are a bit more complicated, and we'll make more sense of them as we go through our video. The second one, that a verb is a word that in various languages is inflected for agreement with the subject, for tense, for voice, for mood, or for aspect. That one we will clarify a bit today as we talk about Latin verbs. And then the third point, that a verb typically has rather full descriptive meaning and characterizing quality, but is sometimes nearly devoid of these, especially when used as an auxiliary or linking verb. Now, Latin doesn't have many auxiliary or linking verbs. In fact, some would say that Latin doesn't have any of these at all. So what happens is that verbs can, in Latin sentences, not always be the most important things, but sometimes it can be really, really powerful for communication. So let's back up a little bit and talk more about each of these first 2 points. So let's take a look at these 5 sentences. To practice, let's make sure we understand what a verb is in these sentences. So pause the video and then identify your verb in each of these 5 sentences. All right. You are correct. If you said that Pompeii is in Italy, that is your verb. In sentence 2, sees is your verb, that Gaius is doing the action of seeing smoke coming out of Mount Vesuvius. And then frightens is your verb, because Mount Vesuvius is actively frightening the people of Pompeii. That's the act that is happening. Gaius loves his wife Cornelia. Loves is telling us about what Gaius is doing. It's his mode of being. And hopes to preserve her. Hopes is also telling us about Gaius's state of being, that he wants to preserve her. And to preserve is also a verb. It's a special form called an infinitive that we'll talk about later. And then in sentence 5, Gaius and Cornelia flee from Pompeii. Flee is your verb. It's the act that Gaius and Cornelia are doing. And in fact, most of the people did actually escape from Pompeii, that it's only a small fraction that did actually perish in the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. So let us return to Latin verbs and make sure we understand what we mean by a verb being inflected. Now, Latin is an inflected language, and Latin and Greek are inflected languages. So what do we mean by inflected? Well, an inflected language uses different endings on words to communicate different things. So if you take a look at the 2 sentences I just read, the S on languages tells us that we're talking about more than one language, Latin and Greek. but there is no S on language, so we're only talking about one. We also see that there's a different form for is than are. So an inflected language uses different endings to tell you about the role of the words in a sentence. And Latin is much more inflected than English. If you look at this example of the verb I love, you love, he, she, it loves, we love, y'all love, and they love, only the third person singular form, he, she, it loves, changes to show you who or what is doing something. And this is a pretty weak inflection in English. That it does exist, but it's not there as commonly as in Latin or ancient Greek. So for Latin, the endings of your words change. So it's sort of like this, that we don't need to use a pronoun to indicate the person in number of who's doing the loving, that we could just say loves. And you would know that it's he, she, or it, or Bob, or Sue, or Joe, or Jill. Any of those people would work. But if we just say love, you don't know if it's I love, you love, we love, y'all love, or they love. In Latin, there would be different endings on each of these to communicate that idea. So let's look at these Latin verbs now that we understand that Latin is a much more inflected language than English. So there are 4 groups or conjugation of verbs, and there's a few irregular verbs. So there's first conjugation verbs like amo, amare, and second conjugation verbs like moneo, monere. And then there's some irregular verbs like sum esse. There's not many irregular verbs, and sum esse and possum posse will be the only ones we'll learn in the next year. We'll focus mainly on these regular conjugation ones, the ones that follow standard patterns. And regardless of whether or not the verbs are regular or irregular, they all have the same 5 qualities or characteristics. Each verb will have a person, a number, a tense, a voice, or a mood. The person can be first person, second person, or third person. First person is I or we, that if we imagine we're having a conversation, we are the most important people. I am the most important person because I'm the one speaking. Second person is you or y'all. You are the next most important person to me in the conversation. And third person is the person we're talking about. They're not quite as important in the conversation. So he, she, or it, or they. You could also think of the third person narrator in a book always uses he, she, it, or they as the proper pronouns. Or a first person narrator will tell it from the point of view of one of the characters, I or we. A verb can also be singular or plural. That's a different number. So the number of people that are being talked about with this verb, whether it's singular, I, you, he, she, it, or plural, we, y'all, or they. Verbs also have their own tense. There are 6 tenses in Latin: present, imperfect, future, perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. Each of these 6 tenses tells you when the action of the verb is happening. And sometimes they talk about aspect, whether an action is ongoing or it's complete. In this video, we'll only teach you about the present tense. We'll learn more about the other 5 tenses later. The Latin verbs also have a voice, active or passive. An active verb, the subject is doing the action. In a passive verb, the action is happening to the subject. This video will only tell you about active verbs. Finally, we have a mood: indicative, imperative, infinitive, and subjunctive. This video will focus on indicative verbs. We will learn imperative moods soon, and then the infinitive mood we will also talk about a little bit. The subjunctive we will learn a bit later on. So all of these, to help us understand what a verb is, we need to understand what the dictionary citation form is. And a dictionary, when it tells us here is what a verb means, we look it up and we see 4 principal parts. And these 4 principal parts will look like this. They'll be amo, amare, amavi, amatum, or moneo, monere, monui, monitum, or like sum, esse, fui, futurum. And each of those principal parts has its own different form, and these 4 principal parts allow us to construct all of the various inflected forms of a Latin verb. They also allow us to tell you what conjugation the verb is. So first, conjugation verbs, in that present active infinitive, the second principal part, has a ARE in first conjugation. And second conjugation, in that second principal part, that present active infinitive, has the long ERE. And then irregular ones look nothing like either of those. And we'll talk about third and fourth conjugation later. So remember, first conjugation verbs have long ARE in the second principal part, and second conjugation verbs have a long ERE in the second principal part. So we use these 4 different forms in our principal parts to construct the rest of our forms for verbs. So let's start out by conjugating or creating the forms of a first conjugation verb in the present tense, active voice, and indicative mood. We will use the example amo, amare, amavi, amatus, which means to love. So conveniently, it looks like the verb that we talked about before. So to create a present active indicative verb, and really we use the similar formula for imperfect and future tenses, there's this purple formula at the bottom of the screen. Stem plus the stem vowel plus a tense marker. For the present tense, there isn't one, but there will be for imperfect and future, so that's why I'm mentioning it now. And then you add your person and number ending. So let's go through that a bit more slowly. So, like I said, each of your 4 principal parts is a specific form. The first principal part is your first person singular, present active indicative form. So amo is the first person singular, I love. You can just move that right on down. So you have that as basically a free answer. And then let's form our others. First, we need our stem. To get our stem, you take your first principal part for first conjugation verbs and remove the O, or you can take the second principal part and remove the long ARE. Either way, you get the same answer, that your stem is AM. So you can write that for everything because we're building off of our stem. And then we add our stem vowel. Because it is a first conjugation verb, because the second principal part ends in long ARE, your stem vowel is an A. Remember that this will change for each conjugation. So first conjugation, you put an A here for your stem vowel. And then you add your tense marker, but there isn't one for present tense. And then you add your person and number endings. Your person and number endings for the present tense and most other tenses are OST, mus, tis, ent. So you just add those on to the end of each of your verbs. And overall, you will get first person singular, amo, I love. Second person singular, amas, you love, third person singular, amat, he, she, it loves, and first person plural, amamus, we love, second person plural, amatis, y'all love, and third person plural, amant. As you finish copying these down, I'll just say that if you notice, your stem vowel is a long A. And the third person singular and plural forms no longer have that long A. That's because the T and the NT shorten it. For this verb, and for all first conjugation verbs, you do not need to know any of these macrons. So you can write them down, you can memorize them if you want, but you will not gain or lose points for including them or not including them on any quiz for me. Once you've finished copying these down, you can resume the video to practice for yourself. All right, so now it's your turn. Conjugate the verb ero, errare, eravi, eratus. So what do I mean by conjugate it? I mean create these 6 inflected forms. Create those forms using the proper endings and this proper equation at the video, or at the bottom of the screen. So pause the video and play when you're ready. Okay. Hopefully you remembered that the stem is ERR because you're removing that O from the first principal part or the ARE from the second principal part. And so that would give you the answers ero, I err or I wonder, eros in the second person singular, you wander, erat in the third singular, he, she, it wanders, eramus, we wander, eratis, y'all wander, and errant, they wander. And make sure you have both R's in there because each letter in a Latin word is important. If you don't have both R's, this verb means something totally different. Once you've finished checking your answers, you can resume the video to learn about second conjugation verbs. Okay, so as our example for second conjugation verbs in the present active indicative, let's use the verb moneo, monere, monui, monitus. Just like for your first conjugation verbs, and really all verbs, that first principal part is your first person singular present active indicative form. So you can just move it down. So you get moneo. You'll notice here that the E is part of the form. The stem vowel sticks around a bit more in second conjugation than it does in first. So let's look at how you form all of your other persons and numbers. So again, we follow our equation. We get our stem, mon, from chopping off our EO and our ERE from our first and second principal part respectively. And then we add our stem vowel. Because this is second conjugation, we are going to add a long E instead of the A that was for first conjugation. And remember, we know that this is a second conjugation verb because there is the long ERE in the second principal part of our dictionary entry or citation form. Then we add our tense marker, which conveniently there is not one for present tense, but there would be for imperfect and future. And then we add our person and number endings. We already have the O for first person singular. And then we add on the S, the T, the mus, tis, and end. So we get these forms. Moneo, I warn, mones, you warn, monet, he, she, or it warns, monemus, we warn, monetis, y'all warn, or monent, they warn. And you'll notice that these are the exact same endings for first and second conjugation verbs. So you only have to memorize this set of 6 endings. And remember our different stem vowels and how to find the stem to conjugate a verb. Once you finish copying this down, you can resume your video to practice another verb conjugation. Okay, so it's your turn to practice conjugating the verb video, videre, vidi, visus, meaning to see. Just like video, you are watching a video. So pause the video and conjugate this verb, and then resume the video when you're ready to check your work. Okay, so hopefully you remembered that you get your stem by chopping off that EO or the ERE from your first and second principal parts, and you get wid. So then you add your stem vowel and person and number endings, and you get wideo, I see, wides, you watch, widet, he, she, or it sees, widemus, we watch, widetis, y'all see, and wident, they watch. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know, and I'll be happy to assist you. Have a good day.